Absolutely thrilled to be part of this event today. I want to say a particular thank you to Onward, who are hosting this, but also Nesta, Bite Back, and the School Food Review. And we've got members of all these organisations on our panel today. When we set up the Food Foundation, and it's not just about the Food Foundation, it's about people who are concerned about food poverty, I was in Parliament and I was representing a constituency with an average wage of £16,500 a year. And I don't think anybody, Michael can disagree here, believed that there was something called food poverty and food insecurity. But I certainly saw it, and I think now we're in a situation following both COVID and now the cost of living crisis that we are absolutely clear that there is a crisis out there. This event is not really about discussing free school meals, whether we should implement them or not. It is about how we need to implement them and how we need to extend free school meals to every child that is on universal credit. I think the facts speak for themselves. 800,000 children in poverty are not eligible for free school meals. That is the cliff edge that we all talk about when it comes to the benefits system. And it exists earlier than the whole of the Universal Credit Programme. 2.6 million are in food insecurity. And this is getting worse. This is today. And I think we've got to understand that I do a lot of work in energy, and if you think about the energy price spikes, food is probably 3-4 month lag to that. So we're coming to a winter where we're going to see quite significant spikes. If you divide universal credit, it means that every person in a household has £4.30 per day to spend on food. And we have to ensure that those younger people are getting the start that they want. The facts that have come from the Food Foundation most recently is that UK children, not just in low incomes, but particularly with low incomes, are actually shorter than our European counterparts. We have a basket of food. Now, the normal basket, the basic basket of food, is today 15% more expensive than it was at the beginning of this year. And as I say, the lag is going to be that is only going in one direction. So it is an increase on the current levels as inflation has been calculated. So this is about ensuring that our children have a future, that we have a productive education system and a productive set of young people coming through to build our growth, to build our society. So on that note, and giving you a little bit of the stark background to where we are, I wanted to introduce this fantastic panel. So it's wonderful to have Michael, and Michael obviously being an absolute champion, both of the issue about benefits, but also that key component of levelling up, which has to happen, and it has to start at children's level, also as well as the wider growth level. But Michael will speak right at the end. Thrilled to have the star Henry Dimbleby, who has been absolutely at the forefront of food strategy on the DEFRA board, but much more importantly, commissioned by Michael to write the National Food Strategy that is extremely clear about how we need to support young people and the whole free school meal agenda. Nick Capstick has been absolutely a leader in writing and in many ways both the frontline experience of what it is like in schools, and particularly the schools that you work with, where you've got a very, very high level of people on free school meals. But I think your experience, but also the report that you wrote, was absolutely instrumental in informing people. But I'm particularly excited to have Christina on our panel from Bite Back. And Christina is going to give you her personal experiences, but also as an ambassador for Bite Back has really seen a wide range of fellow young people who have gone through the journey of absolute food insecurity and finding that food, both of quality and also of quantity, is really not being provided adequately. So, I'd love to start off with Henry. You very clearly wrote that free school meals needed to be extended to everybody on universal credit, really focusing on this issue about how do we deliver this agenda here at this party conference, and how do we persuade ministers that this is a priority for growth, productivity, and more importantly, our society and health. Henry.
Thank you, and thank you very much for inviting me today. I wonder sometimes, I've been kind of trying to think about it over the last couple of days being here, why the Tory party has such a problem with this agenda in the communication of it, when they have actually done an enormous amount of policy, and there's been a huge movement forward in the policy in this area over the last 10 years. And then I remember when we published the school food plan, which was another review that was commissioned by Michael, which ended up with introducing universal free school meals for infants, cooking on the curriculum for those up to the age of 14 as compulsory, and many other things. The front page on the Guardian was Gove's socialist masterpiece, which we were delighted by, but I'm not sure that if you're a politician trying to build a Tory party base is necessarily the what you'd want to see. So, I mean, if you look at what has happened over the last few years, we had those things I just talked about. The Tory party's put money into breakfast clubs, they made holiday activity and food programmes, they rolled those out over the whole country last year. In the Levelling Up white paper, they committed to Eat and Learn, more action on school food and community Eat Well programmes. They've done the sugary drinks levy. So they've done an enormous amount, but kind of without somehow being able to take, almost not taking credit for it, almost as if they've been forced to do it. So your question is, how do you change that narrative? How do you make this something that that everyone can own? And I think that you need to start at a place where everyone can agree. So you need to your initial premise. You can't go in saying we need to increase free school meals for children. You have to start where we agree. And I think, we talked about this yesterday, Winston Churchill's words. He said, the greatest asset a nation can have is the health of its people. Free school meals were first introduced because by the Tories, because they recognised that the population weren't eating well. They come into towns, they were stunted, they weren't healthy. And we need to start at this idea that we need to have a healthy population. You're never going to have a population that is productive, that's inventive, that is dynamic, if everyone is sick. And you're certainly not going to have a small state if your National Health Service is sucking up more and more and more of the money from everything else. By 2035, it's projected that the NHS will be spending more on treating type 2 diabetes alone. That's one dietary illness than it does today on all cancers. It's going to bring the whole state crashing down. So you need to start with that premise. In terms of the next 2 years and what does that look like in a cost of living crisis, I think that you need to do a couple of things. So I think that actually the sugar and salt reformulation tax that I proposed in the strategy is not doable at the moment. I just don't think you could do it. But there are two areas where I think you can move forward, and one is free school meals. When we did the school food plan, we looked at a number of bits of evidence. The Children's Society had calculated that there were 700,000 children just above free school meals threshold, which hasn't changed since then, so it's got worse than this, had £10 a day. The families had £10 a day to spend after rent. So £2.30 on free school meals is a tricky proposition. We analysed the data of what is that from 15,000 parents of what they're paying for free school meals, and what you see is obviously huge uptake of school lunches on free school meals, but afterwards it drops right down. So there's only, in the next decile, there's 10%, and then it goes up again. So you're clearly seeing a group of children whose family can't afford to give them free school meals. And what they're giving them is, almost without exception, is crisps and a white bread sandwich, because that's all they can afford. And that is not food that will, in fact, when you give these children free school meals, you see a huge increase in fruit and a reduction in crisps and chocolate bars in their diet. We actually argued, and I but still believes passionately, for universal free school meals. And in fact, when we were doing this, we slightly took we said, this is very expensive. We were initially slightly kind of wishy-washy about it, but we think it's a good thing. Michael said, if you believe it, say it. And so we put a very strong case. He didn't say he believed it, but he said, if we believed it, say it. And say it strongly. So we put a very case. The case for universal free school meals is, I think, very strong. There's good evidence to show that it creates a culture in a school that actually has a benefit not just on the performance of those who didn't get school meals, but of those people already on school meals, because it gets the school eating together, you create a culture together, you get the teachers eating together. But in the meantime, this idea of relatively cheap, but £400 million to extend it to all people on universal credit. The benefits of that, I hear there's a Deloitte report coming out where they've done a really exacting analysis in about a week's time, showing there's a huge return on investment. That is a no-brainer. The other thing that I would do is looking at how change happens in this area. We know from the law on the curriculum, the change in curriculum being compulsory up to the age of 14, that a law may be necessary, but it isn't sufficient. I go into schools all the time where they are not delivering that curriculum. You can't actually, in the end, passing laws in themselves doesn't create action always. You can't send in the army to improve free school meals. You can't send people to prison for serving bad food in hospitals. But it is necessary, and then what you need to do underneath that is to energise and channel local individual passion. And I think the single thing the government could do on that is say to hospitals and schools and government departments, you have to be accredited. You could choose who accredits you, but you have to have some accreditation. And you would find a whole bunch of people who are really, who know how to transform schools, going into schools and changing them from the bottom up, and going into institutions and changing them from the bottom up. So, I would say to the Tory party, this stuff is not only the right thing to do, it is sensible, and it is very well evidenced. And when you are navigating a landing strip between, completely understandably, trying to create growth in the economy, because that's what's going to save us long term, being very clear that you are supporting those in the meantime who are really struggling and giving them the opportunity to thrive is just as important.
Thank you, Henry, and very, very powerful points there. And it was absolutely in the 1930s when the Conservative Party were adamant that the health of this nation started with children right at the very beginning, and so it is a strong Conservative narrative. Nick, you sit right at the front line, and you, in many ways, you run many sort of academies, and how do you see the differentials between both primary and secondary school, those who just fall off this cliff, and what do you feel that we need to do, and how can we shape this argument to absolutely land it and nail it?
Okay, well let's look first of all at what schools are about. Schools are about two things, in my opinion. The first one is about employment. Even from the moment a child enters school at the age of 4 or 5, we're looking at every part of their career in school is about creating somebody who can create wealth, both personally and for the country. So that's point one. Point two is about creating good citizens, people who buy into society, people who are able to share things like good memories, share things like good food, share things like reminiscences. And so that social element, as well as the employment element, are key to what a school is all about. And I'm the CEO of 32 schools in the southwest and central South England, and they are all what would traditionally be called disadvantaged schools. Schools which that have either failed for pedagogical reasons, for financial reasons, but we prefer to call them underserved. Underserved schools rather than disadvantaged, because disadvantage is an outcome. It's what happens when something happens. And for me, the reason why those children are disadvantaged, the societies, the communities they come from, is because they're underserved. And as well as being the CEO, I'm also a head teacher. I've been doing it for 18 months. I went back to the first school that started the trust that I am CEO of. And in that school, it's in the middle of Swindon, in the middle of one of the most impoverished areas, and it has 48 different languages spoken. 89% of our kids don't speak English. And so the cultural diversity is both a gift, but it's also a barrier to some families accessing benefit systems and so on. So what I thought I would do is give you 3 little vignettes of 3 young people that I know particularly well. The first one is Dishan. Dishan is a year 3 Tamil child. And I've got in front of me a report. We use something called CPOMS, which is a management information system for recording when children are in distress. And a recording from the 14th of September. Dishan came to school again today crying, saying that he's really hungry. So at 9:30 I gave him something to eat. This is one of our admin staff. I then also gave him some additional food for snack at 10:30. So that was on the 14th of September. We decided we'd get Mum in and we'd talk to Mum. And so I ended up speaking to Mum. And Mum arrived quite in a bit of a state from the chicken factory. A chicken factory where she earns 30p an hour after an 8-hour shift, because she's the one that's willing to put her hand into a chicken and pull out the guts by hand. And she'll do that for £2.40 extra a day. She lives in a nice house, about £240,000 worth of housing, nice Georgian terrace. But she lives there with 5 other families. 3 families live in the top floor, where the bedrooms are, one in what would formerly be the living room, and one which would be the former dining room. And when I met Mum, she basically said, do you know what, I'm struggling. I'm struggling to give Dishan food. I'm struggling because I don't get home, because I've just done nights. I'm struggling because when I get home, I haven't got the imagination, really, to think about how can I give him something that's going to interest him, and so on. So that's Dishan. Then there's Millie. Mills, lovely year 6 girl. She comes to us every month to get sanitary products because her family can't afford those sanitary products. But she's quite an angry, aggressive girl. An angry, aggressive girl, and every day at the dinner queue, she pushes her way to the front. She pushes her way to the front so that she can sit at the end of a table and face the wall. Because in facing the wall, she hides her lunchbox, which has very little in it, and what she has in it has no pride. And so Millie's there, facing the wall. And then there's Ahan. Ahan, a year 9 boy, about 15 years of age, and a lot of his community access to food banks. And on a Sunday, Ahan walks 5 miles around all of the families in his community and collects the tinned meat which the food banks in their generosity give to his community, but they cannot use. Tinned meats that have either pork or gelatin or something in them. And I went to see the Imam and said, shall I have a word with the food bank? And he said, no, don't. Because actually, what we do is, Ahan goes around and he collects all of those tins, and then we go and exchange it for fresh fruit and veg with a local retailer, who then sells on the cans. So that's what real poverty is like, and real food insecurity is like in our schools. Schools that are supposed to create wealth by creating people who are employable. Employable because they're intelligent, they're articulate, they know they have the skills to earn money. But also young people who are worthy of employment, because they are great to have around. They can bring that added value to a company. So those are the 3 children, but back to the disadvantaged. All of my schools are called disadvantaged, but they're not. They're not disadvantaged, they're underserved. They're underserved by society, they're underserved by the system and the bureaucracy. There are 2 types of disadvantage: that which you can't get hold of, and that which you don't understand enough about to get hold of that which you might be able to get hold of. So corporate parenting just doesn't exist for a lot of our families. Going and saying, look, I need a hand. I need something that will help me to get back where I need to be. So for me, That's why this is so important. As well as being the CEO and the head of the school, I'm also the independent chair of the School Food Working Reform Group. I've got those words in the wrong way, but that's what they mean. And the reality is that that group is an umbrella group that brings together charities, educational unions, other unions. It brings together suppliers and caterers. And with that collective genius, we actually understand the school poverty insecurity around food that we need to push forward. And that's one of the reasons why I'm here today, to say actually this is a good forum. This is a forum in which we can offer solutions, we can support. We're not looking to be adversarial, we're looking to say this is the real lived experience of our kids in schools, and therefore what are we going to do about it collectively? So that's my view of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Thank you so much, Nick. And actually, the point about food banks is really, really important. It has been, in many ways, a sort of sellotape that's held families together. And in certain communities, the food banks are now starting to find it really difficult to actually have donations. And so we're actually hitting quite a major crisis. Christina, we're locals to each other, which is fantastic in London. And you've had obviously much of lived experience, but I'd love you to explain in many ways, as I said, how you and other people within the community are finding today the situation within schools. And in many ways, one of the things that really worries me, and I'm sure Michael would share this, and that is that we're starting to get an even bigger gap between the outcomes of more prosperous children and those children on lower incomes, and this is just getting wider and wider.
Yeah, I think to talk about schools, you have to realise the environment that young people are living in outside of schools. So I live in a food desert, and my journey to school, I go to school in Westminster. Well, I went to school in Westminster, wow. My journey to school would be walking from my area, which is, you know, loads of junk food shops, little to no access to nutritious food at an affordable price, walking across Vauxhall Bridge into Westminster, and then seeing like all these options that are great and nutritious, but you know, out of my price zone, and then going into school and having food that isn't that great, isn't that nutritious. And we are bombarded with junk food wherever we are. If we're online, as I said, on my way to school, there's street advertising. So schools are really the one place that young people can actually get access to a nutritious meal, and so we really need to seize that opportunity. I think particularly now with the cost of living crisis, the reason why I first joined Bite Back is because I didn't know I was living in a food desert, and I found out that I was twice as likely to develop obesity because of where I live. I'm likely to die around 10 years younger than my more affluent peers because of the food that I'm eating, which I don't have a choice in. And then when you see what's going on with the cost of living crisis and the amount of the hundreds of thousands of children that are getting pushed below the poverty line, it's kind of mind-boggling that they don't have that provision, because the odds are already stacked against us. Like we already have really depressing life prospects. So why isn't it that our government and our schools can't at least protect us by giving us that one nutritious meal? I was 16 when I first started campaigning for free school meal provisions, when I first launched the petition to extend free school meals over the holidays during lockdown, and I was in year 11 then. I'm now in my gap year, I'm 19, and I'm still talking about the same thing. It's really, really infuriating. And on top of that, the free school meal discussion, free school meals was first passed in the UK in 1906, and it's only now, 100 years later, that young people are included in the discussion. But this is about us, and this is like the first time, there's probably a panel with like a young person on talking about our lived experiences and why this is so important to us. So I think when we're talking about the solutions that we should see in schools and local solutions, we should be talking about the young people that are involved. and I think Nick's reframe of talking about these schools and children being underserved is really important, because we're not supporting them, right? We're not giving them the best chances they have to go on to get a great job and live a happy life and a fulfilled one as well. And as I said, when I first started, I was hearing, I had seen myself in school, I was on free school meals, but people that were too ashamed to say that their families couldn't afford food, they just went without it, or they got chicken and chips for £1 after school. Now I'm seeing the same things, and the younger people that we're recruiting at Bite Back have the exact same stories. It's really urgent, and now especially, as I said, because of the cost of living crisis and the 800,000 children that are in poverty but aren't eligible, we have to act now. Universal free school meals, universal school meals sounds great, and it is great, and that is something that we should strive for in the long term. But right now, there are those 800,000 children that need action now.
Christina, thank you, and that's very, very powerful. And I think that point about young people must be part of this conversation and must be part of designing the future. I also think this issue about environment is really important. I remember in Margate, we had quite a lot of properties, privately rented accommodation, where actually they had 3 kids and they were given a microwave. So you are captured by a certain type of food with no ability, and when people talk about we must educate people how to cook from scratch, this is all really fanciful in many, many environments. So thank you so much. Michael, you have heard this fantastic panel, and we're really here to understand from you and get your guidance on how we can actually deliver this. £477 million it is to deliver on this policy, which is really a sort of rounding error when it comes to looking at the price support. We've got these stats coming out from Deloitte's PwC, I think, next week, which are going to absolutely hit that Treasury soft or sort of point that needs to be delivered. So how can we look at this and ensure that we're actually delivering this message, delivering the policy? And I know that you're very committed to the universal credit inflation link, which I absolutely 1000% agree with. But this is something that is really a much, much smaller part of a budget, but absolutely targets those kids who are just falling off the cliff.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank every member of the panel and to Onward and to the Food Foundation for bringing us together. Laura's right, everyone's right. We're here discussing potentially an extension of the welfare state at a time when pressures on budgets everywhere are tight. But I think that the proposition that's been put forward by other members of the panel is urgent, right, and timely for a variety of reasons. Let me go back a couple of steps before I go forward. When I became Shadow Education Secretary, my then number 2, Nick Gibb, said, you can read as much as you like, Michael, about education, but the most important thing is to visit the very best schools and to learn from them. And by the very best schools, he meant the very best comprehensives. And by the very best comprehensives, they were often, but not always, academies. So I visited a school, Mossbourne Community Academy. The then head teacher, Sir Michael Wilshaw, went on to become chief inspector. Again, one of the striking things about Mossbourne, it's been much talked about. It's quite a controversial school in some respects. But one of the striking things about it is that it is genuinely comprehensive. It draws from that community in Hackney. It has banded entry so that it ensures that there are children from every ability as well as every socio-economic mix around there. I'm just putting that in context because when you visit Mossbourne, you find that it is an amazing school with a concentration on the types of activity and the types of facility that have in the past more commonly been associated with the independent sector. So, when a teacher or any adult enters, every member of the class rises in order to show respect for adult authority. Very old school. When you have music, every student there is encouraged to learn a musical instrument and to take part in the school orchestra. or the string quartet, or the choir, as part of being part of the school community. Very old school. In the curriculum, when there was flexibility over what to teach, the teachers were encouraged more often than not to choose the most stretching thing. So if you had to teach a Shakespeare play, it wasn't the case that you chose the shortest or the easiest or the most accessible one, or the one that Baz Luhrmann had turned into a striking musical. They deliberately went for the most stretching. Very old school. One other thing, you can see what I'm leading up to. In the dining hall, everyone ate together. And again, if you were to go to one of our trad public schools and all the rest of it, that's what happens. And when I say everyone ate together, it wasn't the case that you had the teachers up on a rostrum and the students there. Everyone queued together, everyone ate together, it was the same food, packed lunches. No, this was a school community in which everyone was looking out for everyone else. And things like the uniform rules were there to say everyone is equal within the school, but everyone is special within the school. And the reason why they had school meals for all is, while you're here, you're part of a community, and we care for you at the same time as having high expectations. I also went to Sweden to look at the schools there. There they have quite a, what we might call neoliberal approach towards education in some respects, because they have free schools, competition, new entrants into what they frankly call the school market. But every school in Sweden has free meals at lunchtime for every student. And it is natural to eat together. The idea of taking a packed lunch in would be, it's just bizarre. It's as though you had to construct your own pencil from wood and graphite before going into the classroom. It's provided for you. That's what you need to learn. Fast forward. Another school that I love that was set up when we were in the coalition years. Again, a school that polarises opinion. Michaela School in Brent. Not everyone's cup of tea. I love it. Super strict head teacher, Catherine Burbelsing, the strictest head teacher in England. Catherine's controversial. But the other thing is, when you visit that school, every table at lunchtime, it will be, every day it changes. One student will serve the others. One student will lead a conversation. There will be a member of staff, normally a teacher, but sometimes a member of the support staff, at every table, so there is a structured conversation. And it's not just the case that the food is provided, it is also the case that the good food is celebrated, but sitting together, having a conversation over a meal, appreciating what it is to be a part of, a community, that's at the heart of the school, right at the very beginning. And that is why I found Nick's series of examples, the story about Millie turning away because she was ashamed or uncertain about letting other people see what she was eating, is so affecting. Because at their very best, schools are communities. They are communities exactly, as Nick pointed out, where you learn the sort of behaviour that will allow you to be successful as an adult, allow you to be author of your own life story, allow you to be the person you really want to be professionally. But it's also about being a good citizen and being part of the community and learning how to appreciate food, how to share it, but also learning that food is a communal thing and that it's about reciprocity and being very Tory and good manners. All of these are practical examples of schools that Tories, very much to Henry's point, should love. But part of the mix, an inescapable part of the mix, is not just the uniform, the discipline and the Shakespeare, it is the food, the school meals, the school dinners, and the provision for every student who needs it. And that takes me to a philosophical point before I want to go to a policy point. Henry knows many embarrassing facts about me, and he shared one, which is that when the school food plan came forward, it was depicted as socialist and all the rest of it. Well, this is one of the things that does annoy me and I think needs to be stressed. Interventions by the state at critical moments in order to improve the welfare of all of its citizens are not socialist. It may be the case that socialist and social democratic governments do these things, But if, as Conservatives, we say, all we're really interested in was the free interplay of market forces, maximising individual autonomy, and our role is to progressively shrink the state, we're not Conservatives. Now, Friedrich Hayek, looking down from heaven, might approve, but he wrote an essay, his most famous essay, Why I Am Not a Conservative. Now, I am a Conservative. Conservatives care about communities, about the national community, and they care about public health interventions. So, very brief history lesson, you all know. It was Conservatives who introduced the factory legislation, people like Richard Osler and others, who said it is not enough that factories generate wealth, they have to be places in which individuals can be protected and looked after. It was Conservatives who brought forward vital public health legislation, whether it was on water, air, improving housing, the Artisans' Dwellings Act, and so on. At every point, Conservatives thought, if our country is to succeed, then, exactly as Henry and Laura said, we need to make sure that we have a healthy population. One of the biggest extensions in public health provision happened during the 1930s under Neville Chamberlain. The idea that you would praise Neville Chamberlain now, perhaps anywhere other than Birmingham, might seem eccentric. He's one of those people who was a brilliant cabinet minister, not so great when he became prime minister, but no parallels there. But he did absolutely the right thing. And so philosophically, we absolutely should. And more than that, we absolutely should, because let's imagine for a second that I was a pure market liberal. And all I wanted to do was to improve economic growth in this country. And that's all I really ever wanted to do. Well, I would want to make sure that the population was healthy in the first place. And I would recognise that there will be children who will be growing up in poverty, with families that are experiencing all sorts of pressures. Sometimes parents will be in a tough place themselves. They might be dealing with mental health problems, with substance abuse. They might be in an abusive relationship. And the school is one of the safe places where a child can experience order and care and nurture. And therefore, we should want that child to get all the help that it can, but we should also want to see positive behaviour modelled for a child that may not see that positive behaviour at home or elsewhere in the community. And the other thing, again, is, Christina is right. The voice of young people needs to be heard, but children are children. It is not fair and right to expect a teenager or someone younger to literally to fend for themselves. I'm not averse to the occasional KFC from time to time, but if you are in a situation, as too many young people are, where the journey from, as Christina's was, from home to school is a journey where the only food options are chicken shops, where the pressure, both economically and otherwise, means that you don't have access to the sort of nourishment that you need to grow, and critically, the sort of nourishment that you need in order to be able to make the most of the other opportunities in school, then we're letting those children down. And in the same way as, we would object, and Ofsted would object, if lessons were being conducted in a way that meant that children couldn't benefit. If children do not have access to healthy food, then their attention wanders. Low blood sugar or a poor diet means that they're not capable of getting the most from good teaching and the most from extracurricular activities overall. It is just as much a part of good education as high quality teaching and good extracurricular activity. So that takes us to the final point about policy. Times are tight. In an ideal world, I think that we should have universal free school meals for all children in primary school. That would be my ideal. We've already extended to infants. We should extend it further in an ideal world. But exactly as Henry says, resources are tight. I don't want to be unrealistic. I don't think any of us do. But what we can do is we can extend free school meals to every child in a family in receipt of universal credit for £500 million. Now, £500 million is big potatoes, but given this, as it were, no pun intended, but given the scale of the challenge we face and the benefits that it brings, it seems to me that in the wider debate that we're having about where extra pounds secure value, it seems to me that this is a more than worthwhile intervention, considering some of the other policy choices in front of us. And some of you may be familiar with a website, a news website, called Guido Fawkes, which is run by a number of libertarian provocateurs. Very, very entertaining. But to my surprise and delight, the editor of that website came out in favour of Henry's proposals some time back, because he said that while he didn't like an ever-expanding welfare state, he also didn't like ever-expanding waistlines, and he didn't like welfare spending that wasn't proven to be targeted and effective. And the one thing about free school meals is that it was targeted and effective. Nick and Henry and Christina have talked about some of the ways in which we can make sure that our broader food culture can improve, and I think they're right. And I think there are different ways in which we can look at how we tackle food poverty more broadly, the food deserts of which Christina has spoken, the quality of cookery teaching in our schools, and so on. That's a broad conversation which is well worth having, but I think that this is one particular intervention. And the final thing that I would say is that when I was Levelling Up Secretary, one of the things that was brought home to me is the fact that in those areas of the country most in need of levelling up, we often talk about infrastructure, education skills, all of the things, lower taxes, deregulation, all of the things that can contribute to economic revival. But the foundation of economic revival is good public health in those areas. And there's an ironclad link between poor public health in parts of our country and poor economic outcomes overall. So one of the most effective ways in which we can show that levelling up is not just about, but it's critically important that it is about, enterprise zones and other innovations, is by thinking hard about public health and health inequality. And of the many interventions that we can make, one of the most timely, effective and targeted would be extending free school meal provision to those eligible for universal credit.
Thank you very much, Michael. And what we also know is that preemptive measures actually cost much less, instead of picking up the pieces of the crisis at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So it is a very conservative policy. Now this is open to you. We only have about a quarter of an hour, but what I'd like to do is to take 3 questions at a time and then ask the panel to respond. So this lady here, gentleman there, and the gentleman there. And I'll come round again.
Just a general question. It's Lisa O'Carroll from The Guardian. How worried are you, particularly Nick and Michael, about benefits being effectively cut, so that there won't be a cost of living rise? I know you support it, but the indications are that they're under pressure. And secondly, Nick, can you just explain why that mum was only on 30p a day?
No,
30p an hour?
No, she was willing to work for 30p extra per hour to do a really dirty job. So the basic wage in her factory, she could get 30p extra if she did the dirtiest, the filthiest, the smelliest, the most degrading of jobs. That was the point I was making. She needed £2.40 extra a day, not to survive, but just to get closer to survival. So people will, I mean, this is a woman who also is a cleaner for 2 hours after she finishes at the chicken factory and for 4 hours before she goes to the chicken factory.
And
Yes.
the wide, sorry.
Yeah, no, very quickly.
Okay.
Right, you want to
No,
continue?
just the answer, but you're taking the 3 together. It's
Yes,
fine.
thank you.
James Wilby from the Federation of Wholesale Distributors. We represent the supply chain of food into schools and other settings. Question for the panel. Really, I support everything that's been said today about the extension of free school meals and universal free school meals to children of all primary school ages. However, the policy that was introduced in 2013 for up to 7-year-olds, the cost that was given to caterers was £2.30 per meal. Fast forward 9 years, it's £2.41 now, which represents a massive cut in an inflationary market. We all know that food price inflation is rampant, cost of energy, etc., etc. So, whilst I support the policy and absolutely want it to be introduced, we need to A, sufficiently fund what's already in place, but then B, ensure that there are mechanisms for those inflationary increases to be met by the funding. So it's a great policy, but one which at the moment means that school food quality is going down, smaller portions, worse ingredients, cold food, and that's not good for kids.
Thank you very much. Very important point. Yes.
Tim Clark, I was a secondary head for 18 years, latterly on a very deprived estate in Hackney, not far from Mossbourne, but much much better school than Losbourne.
Which one? Which one?
Skinner's Academy.
Oh.
One thing we tried was to actually make the school meal, the school lunch, compulsory for all people. There were no packed lunches. Where we stood legally, I don't know, but all kids, no one actually challenged it, but the school meal was compulsory for all kids. Some paid for it, some didn't. The advantages of that was it did away with the stigma of who was on a free school meal because everyone had the same. It made the catering very easy because the numbers were the same every day, and so we could concentrate on quality. And we concentrated on quality, not on choice. That was the key thing, to raise the quality of the food. But what we were also very careful to do was to involve parents. So for any parents' evening, we laid on school meals so that parents could actually see what we provide, and that won over a lot of parents to the scheme. The second thing, just to say very quickly, we've concentrated on lunches, but in some ways what was more important was the free breakfast that we offered. That was something the school funded. It was something very basic toast, juice, occasionally an omelette. But on average, I should think something like 10% of the school population turns out every morning for that. And to give the kids a good meal at the start of the day was probably more important than what we offered at lunchtime.
Thank you very much. I'll take 4 and then we'll come round again.
Yeah, Claire Oakley, Head of Policy, Vegan Society. And I just want to pick up on a couple of those points as well. One, I thought was really good about what you said about everyone eating together, but I would just raise there are lots of vegan children, and if there aren't good options for them, then they're kind of left out of that. And the second point is on kind of restrictions in the school food standards. They do mandate the serving of meat, and obviously that is expensive, and it kind of ties into that other point around you were saying about catering meals. If that were removed, then it might make caterers able to kind of make healthier, more sustainable food for cheaper. So that was the other point I wanted to make.
Okay, so 4 questions, and if you wanted to answer one of them, then each of you, then we can. Christina, do you want to start with?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I didn't hear your name.
Tim.
Tim. Thanks for your question. I would disagree. I think lunch is more, not to say breakfast isn't important, but I think lunch is the real opportunity to get nutrition in and to get young people having hot meals. And so as much as breakfast is important, unfortunately, as young people get older, they just skip it. And so actually having a fulfilling meal at lunch, I think.
But that's why we provided it free, to discourage them from skipping it. That was the logic behind it.
100%. But I think there are other factors involved in why young people don't eat breakfast and why, as you grow older, it is just a fact in secondary schools. That and I think what you said is great. Like having schools, enforce that means that everyone eats together at lunch, and that's something that you can't skip. But yeah, that was just a.
So very quickly on the vegan issue. So one of the things that came out of the school food plan is we changed the school food standards. They used to have to type in all the recipes into a computer and calculate the nutrients. And what that meant was you had to be quite a big caterer to be able to have the capacity to do that. It was stopping people cooking from scratch. It was creating kind of menus that would be imposed across multiple schools. You couldn't use waste. And so we changed it to a food-based standard, and I chaired the group that came up with those standards. And at the time, the meat restriction was the only way. We basically came up with some food-based standards and then got a whole bunch of schools to cook them and saw what the nutrition was like. The meat at the time was the only way we could get enough iron in. I actually think it's now inappropriate for the current, both from a climate point of view and from kind of a variety of nutrition. I've actually written to the DFE and said they should change the standards now, that the ones that we created are out of date, and they should now leave it to, they should give some other high iron alternatives that you can use, but they should take meat out every day.
Yes, you want to?
I wanted to sort of pick up with you about the catering side of things, and I couldn't agree more. I have 32 schools, and recently, 6 years ago, we put out a tender, and we had 16 caterers who were willing to come and tender for what was a £1 million contract. We've just recently done it, and there are 3 caterers who have tendered. And those 3 caterers are some of the big people. So where the innovation, where the creativity, where the risk-taking in a subtle way took place, where we could extend the variety, the quality, and also the experience that our kids were having, has now been neutralised. And also the cost savings that we were able, as a trust, and one of the beauties of being a trust is that big bulk purchasing opportunity should drive down costs in the nicest way. So I would agree with you entirely that the notion of going from £2.30 to £2.41 now is woefully insufficient, and it's probably not what people want to hear, economists and politicians want to hear. But in order to make sure that those meals are nutritious, that the invitation to eat them is compelling and inviting, we need to make sure that the food is worthy of creating that very social, that very special time in the day.
Businesses won't tender because they can't afford to do it at those prices.
No, I'm full of sympathy, but frustrated.
Michael.
No, I was going to say that I have an enormous amount of sympathy. All other things being equal, given inflation, then it would appear to be the case that an 11p increase would not be enough. If I were in the Department of Education now, I'd want to crunch the figures in order to make sure that I could come to a point where we knew what was genuinely appropriate. But I wouldn't be in a position here to make that judgment. The only other two things that I would say just more broadly are, having been a minister, I've got a lot of sympathy for the ministerial teams that are there now, because there are so many competing pressures on them. And so, for example, the point about changing the way in which we judge what is right in terms of the range of options available, I know that people will be taking account of choices that young people are making for ethical and environmental reasons. They'll also be taking account of the extent to which we can support domestic agriculture and domestic food production through public procurement and so on. So there'll be lots of competing pressures, and so my general view is I always would like, though I don't always see this happening, but I would like to cut ministers some slack. Good arguments can be made, but it's not always the case that things can happen as quickly as you or I might like.
Fantastic. We have 2 minutes left, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask the panel to say one key point that we have got to land to make sure that we get this agenda absolutely nailed. So I'm going to start with Nick and move along this way.
Okay,
What is the killer blow?
The killer blow for me is the amount of time that parents are having to take off from work at the moment and therefore lose productivity in order to look after their sicker children, because their children are not being fed properly, they're not having hot, nutritious meals. So there's a knock-on effect. Future generations are not going to be able to earn wealth. Current parents are struggling not only to make ends meet, but also to have time off work, which is doing their employers no good at all.
Fantastic. Michael.
What would you want for your own children? Is the question that all politicians should ask, and then that's what you should try to provide for every child.
Fantastic.
And adding on to that, I think you could do the productivity, the health of the nation stuff, but the data is very clear. There are 700, 8,000, 100,000 children who are going hungry every day at school at the moment. You can see it in the parent pay data. You can see it in the in reviews in schools. It is just not right that children should go hungry at school.
Yeah, second that. I'm scared going into winter, and I'm scared of the stories we're going to hear from the young people that fight back, and the ones that are going to pour out from all over the nation. So, yeah, protect our young people. It shouldn't be that hard.
I want to say thank you. I want to say I'm also scared, and I'm also starting to worry that we're in a situation where we really need to start talking to charities that actually work in poverty overseas. We see ourselves as being different, and I think we've got to look at ourselves very, very clearly that there are some major structural problems with food poverty and food insecurity in this country, and we have got to address it. Thank you to a wonderful panel. Thank you to all your ideas, and we will capture those. We need to nail this, and we need to nail this